Welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I founded an eco-conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. Now, I don't just make pottery, I make resources such as books and courses for other potters who want to be more eco-conscious in their pottery practice. And that's what this podcast is all about. It's about me sharing everything I've learned with you, and I can't wait to get started. Let's go. Hello, so before we get on with the episode, I wanted to tell you about two completely free guides that I've made just for you about pottery. And the first guide is called How to Make a Pottery Glaze. So if you've ever been curious about how to make your own pottery glaze, this guide will show you exactly how to make your own glaze from start to finish. It tells you all the ingredients you need. It tells you step by step how to make the glaze, how to stay safe when glaze making, and it's got a stoneware glaze recipe in there. And if you've been curious about how to fire pottery, I have also made a guide on electric kiln firing. So this guide will tell you all the different terms that's used in like kiln firing, and what they mean, and it also takes you through the exact firing schedule that I use to do my bisque firing and also stoneware glaze firing. So it's got all the temperatures in there, all the timings in there, and both of these guides are available from the Oxford Clay website at www.oxfordclay.co.uk/resources for potters. Okay, let's get on with the episode. Hello, welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson, and it's so nice to be here with you today. I'm going to be talking to you about an FFP3 face mask. And so, on the face of it, you might think, well, what's this got to do with pottery? But FFP3 face masks are one of the kind of most essential pieces of pottery equipment. If you're going to be doing anything in pottery to do with clay dust or crushed rock, you really need an FFP3 face mask. So what I wanted to talk to you today was what an FFP3 face mask is, why you need one, and then we're going to talk about some like 4 specific situations which you would really need to use an FFP3 face mask in pottery. Okay. So let's get going. So pottery, on the whole, is an extremely safe hobby activity. There aren't many hazards in pottery at all, but one hazard that there is in pottery is breathing in very, very small particles that are either clay dust, or rock dust. And this can actually be really harmful for your lungs. So it's really, really important that when you're working with any powders at all, that you wear the proper protection, proper respiratory protection for your lungs, because the tiny particles can actually go into your lungs, and they can cause long-term harm basically to your lungs. So an FFP3 face mask is basically the absolute lowest level of protection that you need when working with powders. So any other face mask, say like if it's just something covering your nose and mouth, or if it's like you can get those kind of like painting, decorating type masks and stuff, or if you're kind of sanding wood or something, that literally just elastic and they're kind of, something covering your face. Those are not going to protect you from pottery powders. So an FFP3 face mask, basically the features of it are that it is, so it's kind of made of a kind of soft, like rubbery type material, and it forms a seal around your nose and mouth. So it just kind of goes on your face, forms a seal around your nose and mouth, and it's held on by elastic straps that are sort of held on over the back of your head. And the one I've got I'm holding it up if you're watching on the video, you can see it. But if you're listening on the podcast, basically there's two straps that go around the back of your head. Mine's blue, and it's got these kind of larger like kind of pieces on the back that are kind of help it to stick on, like the help it to stay on the back of your head, help the straps to stay on the back of your head, and help the mask to be held really securely onto your face, forming a good seal around your nose and your mouth. So another feature of an FFP3 face mask is that it often will have some kind of filtration system that you will then need to kind of regularly change. So my one has this kind of like it's almost like a kind of, if you imagine like a fish gill type sort of situation. It's got these kind of little tiny gills of some kind of filtration fabric. It looks like it's either like a fabric or a paper, and they're folded up, and there's loads of them, and them all together, they will create a kind of a filter that will filter out very, very fine powders. So they're kind of all folded up, and there's two sections of them on the mask, and what I need to do is I need to change these. So I've got spares that I basically can change when these might be full up with powders and they're not working properly anymore. I can just switch them out and switch new ones into the mask so it's working properly again. So that's essentially what an FFP3 face mask is doing. It's making sure that no fine powders get into your lungs at all. So what would you actually need an FFP3 face mask for? What scenarios would you be using one of these in? Because I have to say, when I did pottery evening classes, when I learned pottery at evening classes, I didn't use an FFP3 face mask, and generally, it's not something you would see used in evening classes unless someone's doing, something quite specialist. So let's run through the different scenarios, because when if you're, starting to, you want to maybe start making glazes on your own, or you want to start, maybe making clay, or you want to work with kind of, maybe you want to work with like ashes, like plant ashes, and make glazes, that's the scenario when you would start needing to use your own face mask. So in generally like a pottery class, you're not really going to be doing any of those activities. You're just going to be kind of like making stuff, and then at the end of your pottery lesson, like I had, basically we used to have a really kind of strict tidying up time, which we used to have quite a long time to tidy up. It was kind of like, even maybe like 10-15 minutes, where everybody in the whole class was just like tidying up and there'd be one person like wiping the tables, someone would come in afterwards and like wipe the floor, and it would just mean that all that clay, any clay dust was kept to an absolute minimum, because the pottery classroom was like totally clean. So generally that's why you don't see FFP3 face masks, in pottery classes, because the kind of activities you're doing aren't really what you would, use one for. And also the room is kept very clean. So, you're going to be safe from clay dust, basically. So yeah, let's talk about the different scenarios. Okay, so the first scenario that you would definitely need an FFP3 face mask would be if you were making your own pottery glaze. Okay, so lots of ingredients of pottery glazes are very, very fine powders, and these, can damage your lungs. So when you buy, if you buy something from the pottery supplier, if you buy a powdered rock, quite often it will actually have a safety warning on it, and it will say like, do not breathe this in, because it can damage your lungs. So we're talking about materials like quartz, feldspars, we're talking about like china clays as glaze making ingredients. You can use ball clays as well in glazes. So it's those ingredients, maybe Cornish stone as well, and they're all kind of generally like crushed rocks and in powdered form. So you would always need to be wearing an FFP3 face mask for when, from the very moment that you start like measuring out those glazing ingredients to when you have completely finished mixing up the glaze with water. and you know that there's, no more powder in the atmosphere, then you can take your mask off. So, generally a glaze that's made up as a liquid isn't going to be dangerous, in terms of you breathing in that dust. It's just when you're mixing the fine powders, you're weighing those powders out, you're mixing them together. When you mix in the water, quite often the powder can go up into the air around you and stuff. So it's like those are the situations when you really, really need to be wearing your FFP3 face mask from the beginning until you've actually completely and utterly finished making your glaze. Okay, so that's the first one. It's just general glaze making. So yeah, you have to make sure you're wearing an FFP3 face mask then. Okay, so the next scenario is when you're sieving. Okay, so like this isn't necessarily something you would do unless you were making a glaze from plant ash. So again, if you're measuring out those ingredients, you're wearing a face mask, but also if you're sieving ash, you wouldn't also need to be wearing an FFP3 face mask. So I absolutely love glazing with plant ashes. It's something I'm really, really interested in. I practice a lot of. I'm like, I love experimenting with different plant ashes. And seeing the different colours they make and different glazes they make, different textures. It's just one of my absolute passion areas. So, but what I do need to do is I need to sieve the ash before I actually make it into a glaze, because when you're burning plant material, quite often, there's bits that are not burned. If you're burning a wood, there might be bits of charcoal in there. There's also quite a lot of grit in there. Even if you think you're burning something which is quite clean, quite often there'll be bits of kind of soil, grit and stuff that end up in your ash. So you want to be always sieving the ash before you're actually making it into a glaze, before you're using it as a glaze ingredient. So in those situations, you also need to wear an FFP3 face mask, because ash will go into the atmosphere, and ash is actually like caustic, so it can harm, it can irritate your eyes, harm your lungs, irritate your skin. So it's really, really important that you use proper safety equipment. I actually also use these goggles when I'm sieving ash, so I don't want the ash to go into my eyes, and I don't touch the ash with my skin as well. So when you're making up an ash glaze, you don't want to be touching that glaze with your hand. You don't really want to be dipping your pot in there, because it can irritate your skin basically. So if you're interested in learning more about glazing with plants, and you want a really simple recipe that you can use with any plant, I've got all of that in a book, and 60 glaze tests as well for different plants. And the book is called Pottery Glazing with Plant Ash, 60 plant-based glazes from one simple recipe. And it's a very simple recipe. It only uses 3 different ingredients. And you can get that from the Oxford Clay website and on Amazon as well. So that's the second scenario when you might be, you would need an FFP3 face mask, is sieving ash or sieving any kind of powders. If you're thinking about sieving any other powders, I don't actually sieve any other powders. I always just, if I was making a glaze or something, I would sieve that after, unless I'm making ash glaze, I would sieve the glaze after I've made it, basically. You don't really need to sieve powders before you make a glaze. If you're just making it with ordinary ingredients like quartz, cornerstone, things like that, generally you sieve glazes afterwards when they're wet. Okay, so the third scenario is that you might be scraping clay. So I remember when I so when I went to pottery classes, the teacher would always say to me, don't scrape dry clay, so basically this is when clay is it's fully dried out, it might be bone dry or something. You don't want to be scraping it. They would always just say to us, please, don't scrape your clay. And that's because of the clay dust. And, they didn't want clay dust around. They didn't want clay dust, people breathing it in. They just didn't want it in the pottery studio at all. So generally speaking, if you've got something which is like dry clay, you want to be sponging it instead with a damp sponge. And that helps to minimize any dust that's coming off that, that piece as you're kind of finishing it off or something. So you, if for any reason you did need to scrape dry clay, that's the situation when you would really need an FFP3 face mask. So I'm trying to think of a situation when you would be doing this. Maybe perhaps if you're like maybe carving a dry piece of clay. I mean, I don't know, maybe that's something that a potter might do. Or if, say, like there's a bit which you just wanted to, I don't know, really, smooth out, and take, using a sponge would be like too long or something. Or, you wanted to carve some holes in dry clay, maybe drill some holes or something. I mean, generally speaking, people would do a lot of those processes at the leather hard clay stage, because it's just easier to work with the clay at that stage, and dry clay can often be quite brittle and prone to breakage. But I can see some situations when you might be scraping dry clay. Say, like if you want to sort of change the shape of something, you just think, oh, actually, I'm just going to make that side a bit thinner or something, and really scrape it down. And a sponge just isn't going to cut it. It's going to take me hours to do it with a sponge. Then I can see that you might be scraping it with a knife or something. So in those situations, that would create clay dust, and ideally, you really do need to be wearing an FFP3 face mask for that. Okay. So the fourth scenario is if you are spraying glaze. So some potters actually apply their glaze to their pots by spraying it on. And I've actually never done this, but in the pottery studio that I learned pottery in, the educational setting, it was an incredible pottery studio. They had lots of different equipment. It was like adult evening classes, loads of adults would attend. It was like in this adult kind of education college, and so yeah, people will be using that pottery studio all day, for various different classes, and they'd be doing qualifications there as well. And they had this thing called like a glazing booth. And this was specifically if you were actually spraying glaze onto a pot. So it was like a kind of giant kind of Hoover type situation where you could set your pot in this booth, and then you could spray it with the glaze, and then it would kind of make sure that none of those glaze vapors, that powdered glaze, was going into the atmosphere and you breathing it in. But if spraying glaze is something that you wanted to maybe experiment with, then you would definitely need to be wearing an FFP3 face mask, because you really don't want to be breathing in any of those glaze, those glaze particles at all. So, so those are the four scenarios. I hope I haven't freaked you out with you must wear a face mask at these times. But it's really just to say just I wanted to do this episode because I wanted to just show you that actually, pottery is extremely safe, and, there are only a few scenarios when you do need to be wearing the FFP3 face mask. Generally speaking, you don't need it if you're making, just making pottery normally, or, you're always using a sponge, always keeping your space really, clean of clay dust and stuff. It's only really if you're going to be making your own glaze, sieving plant ashes or sieving any other ingredients, scraping a lot of clay, or spraying glaze, that you're going to need your FFP3 face mask. So I love talking to you about FFP3 face mask. My trusty FFP3 face mask is just brilliant. I love it, and I wear it every time I make a glaze. And like I was saying to you, I've been making a lot of plant-based glazes recently, plant ash-based glazes, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. And can't wait to see you on the next one. And until then, wishing you very, very happy potting, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for joining me for the Oxford Clay Pottery podcast. If you're interested in learning more about Oxford Clay or eco-conscious pottery, there's so much for you on the Oxford Clay website. There's books, e-courses, there's a blog on there, loads of other podcast episodes, and I can't wait to share it with you. The web address is oxfordclay.co.uk. I'll see you over there.